Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into some really cool brain stuff today. The neuroscience of decision making. It turns out our brains don't just have one way of making choices, but two whole systems.
Oh, yeah, two distinct systems. One's super fast, all gut feeling and instinct.
Right, like snap judgments.
Exactly. While the other one is slower, more deliberate, the logical side.
So like the careful planner versus the spur-of-the-moment type.
Kinda. And the crazy part is sometimes going against our gut instinct actually leads to better decisions.
Whoa, seriously, that's counterintuitive. So are you saying we should ignore our gut?
Not always. It's more about understanding when each system is most reliable.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like knowing when to trust your intuition and when to, really think things through.
Exactly. And you know what else is wild? Sometimes overthinking can totally sabotage our choices. Like,
Mhm.
you agonize over something simple and end up less happy. That's your brain on overload.
I've totally been there. Too many options, too much thinking, and then bam, regret.
Yep, that's what we're going to unpack today. By the end of this deep dive, you'll understand your own decision-making in a whole new light.
All right, sign me up. So let's start with the brain area we usually associate with decision making, the prefrontal cortex. It's like the executive control center, right? Planning, strategizing,
Exactly. It's the CEO of the brain.
but even CEOs have their limits,
Yeah.
right? So what are the limitations of the prefrontal cortex?
Well, think of it like a high-powered computer, but with limited RAM.
Okay, so powerful but easily overloaded.
Right. It's amazing at complex tasks, but it can get bogged down. One big limitation is working memory.
Working memory. Refresh my memory on that one.
It's basically how much information our brains can hold while we're actively thinking.
Gotcha, like juggling too many things at once.
Exactly. And that limited capacity can lead to some really interesting quirks in how we make decisions.
Give me an example.
One study had people memorize either a couple of digits or like 7 digits. Then, totally unrelated, they had to choose between chocolate cake and fruit salad.
Okay, so numbers and dessert. What's the connection?
Well, those who memorized 7 digits were way more likely to choose the cake.
No way, seriously.
Yeah, it's like those extra numbers were taking up space in their working memory, leaving less room for self-control.
Wow, so our willpower is limited by, like, how much mental RAM we have free?
In a way, yeah. And there's another study, the bottomless soup bowl experiment. People eating from a bowl that secretly refilled itself, they ate way more than those with regular bowls.
That's fascinating. I mean, it makes sense. They don't see the bowl emptying, so they don't realize how much they're eating.
Exactly. They were relying on that visual cue, how full the bowl looked, instead of paying attention to their actual fullness.
That's crazy. So we rely on these mental shortcuts, but sometimes they backfire.
That's right. And, being aware of these shortcuts can help us make better choices.
Yeah, like knowing our weaknesses, right? So, okay, the prefrontal cortex has limited working memory, affects our choices in weird ways.
Right.
But what happens when we, like, overuse that rational part?
Ooh, good question. That's when we can actually start making worse decisions. There's this thing called choking, where overthinking disrupts well-learned skills.
Oh, I've totally choked before.
Yeah.
Like when I try to explain something I'm good at, and suddenly I can't even do it.
Exactly. And it's not just everyday things. Even professionals can choke.
Really? Give me an example.
Renee Fleming, the amazing opera singer, she once forgot how to sing during a performance.
Whoa, how is that even possible?
She started overthinking her technique, got in her own head.
Oh, I can see that happening. Performance anxiety and all that.
Yep. And there's another famous example, Jean Van de Velde, the golfer, famously lost his lead on the last hole of the 1999 British Open.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Such a heartbreaking collapse.
He became self-conscious about his swing, started overthinking it, and boom, disaster.
So even experts aren't immune, but how does this choking relate to, like, everyday decision-making?
Well, there's a study where people ranked different strawberry jams just based on taste.
Okay, sounds delicious.
Right. When they just went with their gut, their rankings matched expert tasters pretty closely.
So the average person was basically a jam connoisseur.
Pretty much. But then they were asked to explain their preferences.
Oh, to analyze why they liked one over the other?
Exactly. And guess what? Their rankings went totally off.
So overthinking actually made their choices worse.
It did. And we see this pattern in other studies, too. Students who chose posters based on gut feeling ended up much happier with their choices later on compared to those who spent time analyzing their reasons.
So what's the takeaway? Should we just ditch logic and always go with our gut?
Not necessarily. It's about knowing when to trust each system.
Right, because sometimes our gut reactions are spot on, Other times, we need to slow down and think.
Exactly. And the key is figuring out which approach is best for each situation.
Easier said than done, right?
Hmm.
But maybe understanding how these two systems work can help us be more mindful.
Absolutely. And there's another fascinating aspect of the prefrontal cortex we need to talk about, how it shapes our expectations.
Ooh, expectations. Interesting. I remember reading about that study with the expensive wine.
Oh, yeah, the one where people thought the same wine tasted better when they were told it was pricier.
Yep, that one. So our brains are literally tricking us into believing something is better just because it costs more.
It's wild, right? And it wasn't just casual drinkers either. Even wine experts were fooled.
Whoa, even the pros. That's a powerful example of how our expectations can change our perception.
It really is. And it's similar to the placebo effect, you know?
Right, like when people expect a treatment to work, even if it's a sugar pill, they often experience real benefits.
Exactly. The prefrontal cortex creates this expectation, and the rest of the brain kind of follows suit. But this same thing can also work against us.
Oh no, how so?
Well, there was this study where people who got an energy drink at a discount actually performed worse on cognitive tasks.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah.
Just because they thought it was a cheaper drink?
Yep. They expected it to be less effective, and their brains made it so.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. So the prefrontal cortex, it's powerful, shapes our reality through expectations, but it can lead us astray.
This is blowing my mind. So much for our brains being perfectly rational, huh?
Nope, not even close. But what about morality? Surely our sense of right and wrong goes beyond just expectations and emotions, right?
Yeah, I would hope so. I mean, there's got to be more to it than that.
Well, that's what we're going to explore next. We're diving into the fascinating and sometimes kind of disturbing world of the emotional brain and its role in morality.
Oh, this is getting interesting. We're going to get into some dark stuff too, right? And you mentioned John Wayne Gacy earlier.
We are. The Gacy case is a chilling example of how crucial emotions are to our moral compass. Stay tuned. Things are about to get real.
Okay, I'm hooked. Can't wait to delve into this. All right, let's get into this John Wayne Gacy case. It's heavy stuff, but I guess it shows how important emotions are to, like, our whole sense of morality.
Yeah, the Gacy case is, it's truly chilling. I mean, he was this successful contractor, active in his community, even played a clown at kids' events.
Right. That's what makes it so creepy. This seemingly normal guy, but secretly a serial killer.
Exactly, responsible for the deaths of at least 33 young men. And you know what's really disturbing? He seemed to have zero remorse, like no conscience whatsoever.
That's what's so scary. It's like, how can someone do those things and not feel anything?
Well, that's a key feature of psychopathy, this deep emotional deficit.
So they're not, like, dumb or anything. It's not an intelligence thing.
No, not at all. Psychopaths often have average, even above average intelligence.
But it's their emotions that are messed up.
Right. Their emotional brains are impaired. Specifically, the amygdala, the part of the brain that handles fear and aversion, it doesn't respond normally.
So, like, for most people, the thought of hurting someone would trigger fear, anxiety, all that.
Exactly. It's a natural response.
But a psychopath's brain just doesn't react that way.
Pretty much. They don't have that instinctive aversion to causing suffering.
So without that emotional break, their actions are driven by pure logic. That's terrifying.
It is. It's like their moral compass is missing a crucial component. So, if morality isn't just about logic, how do our emotions guide our moral choices?
That's a good question. I mean, how do feelings translate into right and wrong?
Well, one way is through empathy. That's our ability to understand and share the feelings of others.
Right, being able to put ourselves in someone else's shoes.
Exactly. It allows us to connect with people, even if we haven't experienced the same things they have.
So it's like a bridge between our own emotions and understanding how someone else might feel.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Speaking of moral judgments, our sources talked about the runaway trolley problem.
Oh yeah, the trolley problem. That's a classic thought experiment, right? It gets people debating.
It really does. So in the first scenario, you're driving a runaway trolley. You can either let it continue on its path, killing 5 workers, or switch it to a different track where it'll kill 1 worker.
Tough choice. But like, logically, saving 5 lives is better than 1. Right.
Right, and most people say it's morally okay to switch tracks, even though it means actively causing one person's death.
Yeah, I think I'd probably do the same. It feels like the lesser of two evils.
But then the researchers changed the scenario. Now you're not the driver. You're on a bridge above the tracks.
Okay, different perspective.
And the only way to stop the trolley is to push a large man off the bridge, sacrificing him to save the 5 workers.
Oh, wow. That changes things. I mean, pushing someone to their death feels way different than just flipping a switch.
Right, and here's the thing. Most people say they wouldn't push the man, even though the outcome is the same, one life to save five.
That's interesting. So even though the logic's the same, the action feels different, more morally wrong.
Exactly. And people struggle to explain why they feel that way. It just feels wrong.
It's like a gut feeling, a moral instinct.
Yeah, it's more visceral. And brain imaging actually shows that different areas are activated in these two scenarios. When people imagine pushing the man, parts of the brain involved in social understanding and empathy light up.
So it's not just a cold calculation. We're actually like feeling the moral violation more deeply.
Exactly. Our moral judgments are deeply tied to our emotions and our capacity for empathy.
This is making me think, we're not just these robots making decisions based on logic. It's so much more nuanced.
It really is. But here's another thought. We don't always have time to deeply analyze the emotional impact of every single decision.
Right. Life's moving fast. We have to make quick judgments all the time.
That's where moral intuitions come in. They're these quick gut-level feelings about right and wrong.
Like we just know something's wrong, even if we can't explain why.
Exactly. Remember that thought experiment about siblings having sex?
Yeah. Definitely unsettling.
People have an immediate negative reaction, even if they can't logically explain why it's wrong.
Right. It just feels inherently wrong. So these moral intuitions, they're kind of like our built-in guide, but how do we make sure they're leading us in the right direction?
That's where the prefrontal cortex comes back in. It helps us regulate those emotions, make more thoughtful choices.
So it's like our rational brain steps in to fine-tune our gut reactions.
Exactly. It lets us reflect, consider different perspectives, think about consequences.
But earlier we talked about how the prefrontal cortex can be overloaded, right? So how do we know when to trust those gut feelings about morality and when to really stop and analyze?
That's a great question, and social connection actually plays a big role. Our sources describe this thing called the ultimatum game. One person gets to decide how to split some money with another person, and the second person can either accept the offer or reject it.
Okay, sounds interesting. So there's an incentive to accept any offer, even if it's totally unfair, right? Because otherwise you get nothing.
Logically, yeah. But people consistently reject unfair offers, even if it means they lose out, too. It's like they'd rather punish the other person for being greedy.
The fairness matters more than just getting the money.
It seems that way, and it makes you wonder, does this still happen when there's no chance of punishment?
Yeah, like what if the other person doesn't even know you rejected the offer?
Well, researchers tested that with something called the dictator game. It's similar to the ultimatum game, but the first person has all the power. They decide how to split the money. The second person just has to accept whatever they get.
Okay, so no chance of revenge in that scenario.
Right. And even then, most people still try to be somewhat fair.
So there's something in us that wants to be fair, even when we don't have to be.
It seems so. But here's the catch. When the dictator can't see the other person, their generosity goes way down. They offer much less when it's not face-to-face.
Oh, that's fascinating. So it's like our sense of fairness is stronger when we feel connected to the person our decision will affect.
That's right. It's not just some abstract principle. It's about our relationships.
It makes you think about people who struggle with social understanding. Like, do they make different moral choices?
Yeah, that's a good point. Individuals with autism, for example, they often have difficulty interpreting social cues.
Right, like reading body language or understanding subtle expressions.
Exactly. And when they play the ultimatum game, they tend to make much lower offers than neurotypical people.
So it's like they're applying a more purely rational approach, even in a situation where most people bring in emotions.
Right. And that difference really highlights how crucial empathy is to moral decision making. But even for those of us who are usually good at empathy, it's not always easy.
Especially when we're dealing with, like, large-scale suffering. Our sources talked about a study where people donated less to charity when they were shown statistics about widespread starvation.
Right, compared to when they were shown a photo of a single starving child.
It's like we can grasp the suffering of one person, but millions. It's
Yeah.
too overwhelming.
It's called compassion fatigue. Our brains are wired to respond to those personal stories, to individual faces and names.
So we need those stories, those personal connections, to keep our empathy engaged.
Absolutely. Even when we're trying to make moral choices on a large scale, that human connection is still vital.
This is all so complex. It's making me think about, like, how our upbringing shapes our morality.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge factor. Our early experiences, our relationships, they all shape how our emotional brains develop.
So, like, if someone grows up in a loving, supportive environment, they're more likely to develop a strong sense of empathy and morality.
Exactly. But on the flip side, what happens when kids experience cruelty or neglect?
Oh, that's heartbreaking to even think about. I mean, what does that do to a developing brain?
Well, research shows that when children face that kind of chronic stress, their emotional brains don't develop normally.
So they might have trouble understanding and responding to emotions in others.
Yeah, it's like their brains have learned that the world is a dangerous place and they adapt to survive.
Right, so their brains are wired for self-protection.
Exactly. But those adaptations, while necessary in a hostile environment, can make it really hard to form healthy relationships later on. And it can impact their moral judgments too.
It's almost like a tragic cycle, isn't it? But are you saying that early experiences determine a person's moral compass forever? Like, there's no hope for change?
Not necessarily. The brain's incredibly adaptable, even in adulthood. Early trauma can have lasting effects, but it doesn't have to define you.
So there's hope for healing, for growth.
Absolutely. With the right kind of support and care, people can overcome those challenges.
That's good to hear. So even when things are really tough, there's still a chance for positive change. But what about for those of us who haven't experienced those kinds of extreme situations? How does this logic, emotion, morality thing play out in our everyday decisions?
That's what we'll explore next, actually. We'll look at how these brain processes influence our seemingly mundane choices, everything from picking a political candidate to just deciding what to have for breakfast.
Whoa, so even those small decisions are more complex than we realize.
You bet. Stay tuned. We're about to unravel the mysteries of the decision-making brain.
So we've been talking about all these complex brain processes, how we mix logic and emotion, and even our sense of morality when we make decisions. But how does all that play out in, like, normal everyday life?
Even seemingly simple choices can involve a surprising amount of internal debate.
Oh, absolutely. Like, just think about trying to choose what to eat for breakfast.
Right, like you've the healthy option, the tasty option, maybe one that brings back good memories, and then there's the one that fits your budget.
Yeah, and each option triggers all these different thoughts and feelings.
It's like a committee meeting going on in your head.
Totally. Our
Well,
brains are having this whole debate, and we're not even aware of it.
researchers have actually observed this using brain imaging. When people are considering different products, their brains show this pattern of activation and inhibition.
So it's a real tug of war going on up there. But sometimes even those simple choices, like what to eat, they can have a big impact on us. I was reading about how our brains can be totally tricked by things like portion size.
Oh, yeah. Portion size is a classic example. There's that study where people took way more candy when they were offered a bigger scoop.
Even though they could have just taken more scoops with the smaller one.
Right. It's like that visual cue of the big pile just overrides our logic.
We fall for those supersized deals even when it's not good for us.
Oh, often, yeah. And this tendency to be swayed by those external cues, it can show up in all sorts of ways. Like, think about those buy one, get one free offers.
Oh, those are dangerous. I always end up buying more than I need.
We're wired to respond to those perceived bargains, even if we actually end up spending more in the long run.
Yeah, our brains love a good deal, even if it's a trick.
Eh.
It all comes back to the prefrontal cortex, right? And its limitations.
Exactly. It's great at planning and reasoning, but it can be so easily overwhelmed.
Our sources mention this case of a newspaper editorial board trying to decide which candidate to endorse in a presidential election.
Oh, yeah. Talk about a high-stakes decision.
They had spent months researching, interviewing candidates, debating all the policies.
And yet they were completely divided.
And it wasn't always about those clear policy differences either.
Right. It seemed like their gut feelings were playing a huge role.
So even in these big, important decisions, emotions are still a factor.
Absolutely. It's not just about cold, hard facts. Sometimes having too much information can actually make it harder to decide.
Remember that study about back pain and MRI scans?
Oh, yeah, that one's a classic. Doctors were more likely to order all these unnecessary tests and procedures when they had those detailed MRI images.
Because they were focusing on tiny abnormalities that weren't even causing the pain.
Exactly, leading to overtreatment, potentially risky interventions.
So more information isn't always better.
Not necessarily. It's about being selective with the information we pay attention to and recognizing that our brains, well, they're not perfect.
That's a good point. So I guess the big question is, after this deep dive into decision-making, what have we learned? What can we actually do to make better choices?
Well, I think the first step is just being aware, recognizing that we're influenced by all these things, emotions, expectations, sometimes even irrelevant
It's
information.
like we have to shine a light on these unconscious processes that are happening in our brains.
Exactly. And once we're aware of them, we can start to use that knowledge to our advantage. We can learn to recognize when our emotions are driving the bus and when we need to engage that rational part of our brain.
And maybe we can be a little more forgiving of ourselves when we make mistakes.
Absolutely. I mean, we're all human. We're all going to fall prey to those cognitive biases, make choices we regret. But the more we understand about how our brains work, the better equipped we are to handle all the complexities of decision making.
That's a lifelong journey, right? Learning about ourselves and how we make decisions.
It really is. And it's not just about making better choices for ourselves. It's about understanding each other better, communicating more effectively, working together to solve problems.
Yeah, I love that. If we all understand our own biases and how our brains work, maybe we can understand each other better too.
Exactly. By understanding how our brains work, we can build stronger relationships, make more informed decisions, and maybe even contribute to a more just and compassionate world.
Well, this has been fascinating. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the neuroscience of decision making.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you've learned some valuable insights that you can apply to your own life. And remember, every decision, big or small, is a chance to learn and grow.
Keep those brains buzzing.